The ice beneath Lorelei Ashford's boots gave way with a sound like breaking glass, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the white world tilted sideways, and she was falling. Her scream ripped through the howling wind as her body plunged through the blizzard into the darkness below, snow and rock walls rushing past her in a blur of white and gray. The landing drove the air from her lungs, pain exploding through her left leg as she crumpled onto the frozen ground 30 feet below the trail. Above her, the storm continued its relentless assault on the Colorado mountains, the opening she had fallen through already beginning to fill with fresh snow. Lorelei lay there gasping, each breath a knife in her ribs, trying to make sense of what had happened. She had been riding from Denver toward the mining settlement of Silver Creek in December of 1882, carrying medicine for her sister who had fallen ill with pneumonia. The journey should have taken 2 days in good weather, but the blizzard had blown in without warning, transforming the familiar mountain pass into a treacherous maze of white. Her horse had bolted when the snow bridge collapsed, and now she was trapped at the bottom of a ravine with the temperature dropping fast and night approaching. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Her left ankle screamed in protest, and when she looked down, she could see it was already swelling beneath her boot. Not broken, she hoped, but badly sprained at the very least. Her heavy wool coat had protected her from the worst of the fall, but she could feel wetness seeping through her riding skirt where she had landed in half-frozen water. The ravine was narrow, perhaps 15 feet across at its widest point, with steep rock walls rising on either side. A small creek ran along the bottom, mostly frozen but still trickling in places. The sound of water mixing with the wind created an eerie symphony that made her feel utterly alone. "Help!" she called out, knowing it was futile. The storm would swallow her voice before it traveled more than a few feet. "Someone please help me." Only the wind answered, driving snow into her face like tiny needles. Lorelei pulled her coat tighter and tried to think. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and had always prided herself on her independence and practical nature. Her father had taught her to ride and shoot, to track game and read the weather, but he had also taught her to recognize when she was in serious trouble. This was serious trouble. If she stayed where she was, the cold would kill her long before anyone found her. But with her injured ankle, climbing out was impossible. She looked around desperately for shelter and spotted an overhang about 20 feet downstream, where the rock jutted out enough to provide some protection from the snow. Using her rifle as a makeshift crutch, she began the agonizing journey toward it, dragging her injured leg behind her. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. By the time she reached the overhang, she was sobbing with the effort, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the frigid air. The space beneath the overhang was small but dry, and out of the worst of the wind. Lorelei collapsed against the rock wall and closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. She had matches in her coat pocket and a small knife on her belt, but precious little else. Her saddlebags with food and blankets were gone with her horse. She could perhaps start a fire if she could find dry wood, but looking around the ravine, everything was buried under snow. Time passed in a blur of cold and pain. She must have dozed, because when she opened her eyes again, the light had changed. The storm seemed to be lessening slightly, though snow still fell steadily. And then she heard something that made her heart leap, the sound of a horse whinnying and a man's voice calling out. "Hello? Anyone down there?" "Here!" Lorelei shouted with all the strength she had left. "I am down here. Please help me." She heard the sound of boots crunching in snow, and then a face appeared at the edge of the ravine high above. Even through the falling snow, she could see he was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a dark hat pulled low against the weather. He was peering down into the ravine, one gloved hand shading his eyes. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was deep and steady, carrying easily despite the wind. "Yes, I fell through the ice. My ankle is injured and I cannot climb out." "Hold on, I'm coming down to get you." The face disappeared, and Lorelei felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly made her dizzy. Someone had found her. She was not going to die alone at the bottom of this frozen hole. She watched as a rope appeared over the edge, uncoiling as it dropped down the ravine wall. The man appeared moments later, climbing down hand over hand with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. His movements were sure and economical, testing each foothold before committing his weight. When he reached the bottom, he quickly crossed to where she huddled under the overhang. Up close, she could see more details. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders made broader by his heavy sheepskin coat. A dark beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes were a startling blue-gray, intense and focused. There was something capable about him that made her feel safer just having him near. "My name is Austin Kincaid," he said, crouching beside her. "I am a rancher from down in the valley. I was heading back from Silver Creek when I spotted your horse wandering loose. Figured someone might be in trouble, so I backtracked and found where you went over the edge." "Lorelei Ashford," she managed through chattering teeth. "From Denver, thank you for finding me. We need to get you warm and out of this ravine fast." His hands moved over her with professional efficiency, checking for injuries. When he touched her swollen ankle, she gasped. "Badly sprained, maybe broken. Can you move your toes?" She tried and nodded. "Yes, it hurts terribly, but I can move them." "Good. Likely just a bad sprain then." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders over her own coat. "I am going to get you to the top, then we will ride for shelter. There is an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles from here. We can wait out the storm there." "I cannot climb," she protested. "My ankle." "I know, I am going to carry you." He stood and moved to the rope, testing it with his full weight. Satisfied it would hold, he came back to her and lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Put your arms around my neck and hold on tight. Do not let go no matter what happens." Lorelei wrapped her arms around him, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from his body and the solid strength of his shoulders. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and horse, not unpleasant. With one arm around her waist, holding her securely against his chest, he gripped the rope with his other hand and began to climb. The ascent was terrifying. The rope swayed and spun as Austin climbed, using his legs to walk up the ravine wall while pulling them both up hand over hand. Snow blew into Lorelei's face, and several times his boots slipped on ice, sending her heart into her throat. But each time, he found new purchase and kept climbing, his breathing steady despite the enormous effort. She could feel his muscles straining beneath his shirt, feel the controlled power in every movement. "Almost there," he said near her ear. "You are doing fine." And then they were over the edge, and he was lowering her onto solid ground. A large bay horse stood nearby, ears pricked forward with interest. Austin quickly secured the rope to his saddle horn, then lifted Lorelei again and settled her in front of the saddle. He swung up behind her and wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady. "This is going to be cold and uncomfortable," he said. "But we need to move fast. Lean back against me and try to keep your ankles still." The ride to the cabin was a nightmare of cold and pain. The temperature had dropped dramatically as night approached, and the wind cut through her wet clothing like knives. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might break, and she could no longer feel her feet. But Austin's arm around her waist was solid and warm, and she focused on that, on the steady beat of his heart against her back, and the way he spoke to his horse in low, soothing tones. "Not much farther now," he would say periodically. "Stay with me, Lorelei." She liked the way he said her name, the gentle concern in his voice. It made her feel less alone, less afraid. She drifted in and out of awareness, the cold making her drowsy despite the pain in her ankle. At some point she realized they had stopped moving. Austin was dismounting, then lifting her down with infinite care. The cabin materialized out of the swirling snow like a gift from heaven. It was small and rough, built of weathered logs with a stone chimney and a single window covered with oiled paper. But it had a door and a roof, and when Austin kicked it open and carried her inside, She could have wept with relief. The interior was dark and nearly as cold as outside, but it was dry and protected from the wind. Austin set her gently on a rough wooden bunk against one wall, then immediately set about building a fire in the stone fireplace. He worked quickly and efficiently, and within minutes, yellow flames were licking at the kindling. As the fire grew, warm light filled the small space, revealing the cabin's sparse furnishings: the bunk, a small table with two chairs, some shelves holding a few supplies, and hooks on the walls for hanging gear. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Austin said, not looking at her as he continued to build up the fire. "Do you have anything dry?" "No. Everything was in my saddlebags." He nodded and moved to a wooden chest in the corner, pulling out what looked like an old shirt and a wool blanket. "These were here when I found this place last year. They are clean enough. I will step outside while you change. Can you manage on your own?" "I think so." He handed her the clothes and went back outside, closing the door behind him. Lorelei heard him moving around, probably tending to his horse. With trembling fingers, she began the difficult task of removing her wet clothing. Every movement made her ankle throb, but she persevered, finally managing to strip down to her undergarments and pull on the oversized shirt. It fell to her knees like a dress, and she wrapped the blanket around herself gratefully. "You can come back in," she called. Austin entered carrying his saddlebags and what looked like her medical supplies bag, which must have been on her horse. "Found this still attached," he said, setting it beside her. "Figured it might be important." "Oh, thank God!" She clutched the bag to her chest. "It is medicine for my sister. She has pneumonia. I was trying to reach Silver Creek when the storm hit." "Silver Creek is another day's ride north, and that is in good weather." He pulled one of the chairs close to the bunk and sat down. "Let me see that ankle properly now." She extended her leg reluctantly, and he began to carefully unlace her boot. Even his gentle touch made her gasp with pain, and by the time he had worked the boot off and peeled away her wet stocking, tears were streaming down her face. Her ankle was swollen to twice its normal size and already turning purple. "Definitely sprained, but I do not think it is broken." Austin's hands were surprisingly gentle as he examined the injury. "I am going to wrap it tight and elevate it. The swelling should go down in a few days, but you will not be walking on it for at least a week." He produced bandages from his saddlebag and wrapped her ankle with practiced skill, then propped it on a folded saddle blanket. While he worked, Lorelei studied him more closely in the firelight. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. There was something solid and dependable about him, a quiet competence that she found deeply reassuring. "You seem to know what you are doing," she said. "I have patched up my share of injuries. Ranch work is hard on a body, and I am usually too far from town to fetch a doctor for every little thing." He stood and moved to his saddlebags again, pulling out some dried meat and hardtack. "You should eat something. When did you last have food?" Lorelei tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think, before I left the last town." He handed her the food and a canteen of water, then settled into the other chair with his own rations. For a while, they ate in comfortable silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. The warmth was slowly seeping back into Lorelei's bones, and with it came exhaustion. Every part of her body ached, and keeping her eyes open was becoming increasingly difficult. "You should sleep," Austin said, noticing her struggle. "I will keep the fire going and keep watch. We should be safe enough here until the storm passes. What about you? You must be exhausted too." "I will rest later. Right now you need it more than I do." He stood and added more wood to the fire, then brought over his bedroll and spread it over her as an additional layer of warmth. "Try to rest, Lorelei. Everything will look better in the morning." She wanted to protest, to insist he rest too, but sleep was already pulling her under like a warm tide. The last thing she was aware of was Austin settling back in his chair, his watchful presence a comfort in the darkness. Lorelei woke to gray morning light, filtering through the cabin's small window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to place where she was or why every muscle in her body ached. Then memory flooded back. The fall, the ravine, Austin's rescue. She turned her head and saw him crouched by the fire, tending a small pot suspended over the flames. "Good morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell into a ravine," she said wryly, then immediately winced as she tried to shift position. Her ankle throbbed with renewed intensity. Austin brought her a tin cup of coffee, dark and strong. "The storm broke about an hour ago. We should be able to travel by afternoon if you are up for it. Your ankle looks a bit better this morning, but you still need to keep off it." Lorelei sipped the coffee gratefully, savoring the warmth and bitter taste. "Where would we go?" "My ranch is about a day's ride south. You can recover there while we figure out how to get that medicine to your sister." He paused, then added, "Unless you have somewhere else you need to be?" "No, no, the ranch sounds fine. Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "Why did you come back for me? You could have just caught my horse and kept going." Austin was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I lost my younger brother to a blizzard 3 years ago. He got caught out checking fences, and by the time we found him, it was too late. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to save someone else, I would take it. No one should die alone in the cold like that." "I am sorry about your brother," Lorelei said softly. "Thank you. Thomas was a good man, just unlucky." He looked up at her and she saw old pain in his eyes. "Anyway, I could not have left you down there. Would not have been able to live with myself." They spent the rest of the morning preparing for the journey. Austin proved to be remarkably resourceful, fashioning a more supportive wrap for Lorelei's ankle, using strips torn from an old blanket, and finding her some reasonably dry clothes from the supplies in the cabin. They were too large and clearly meant for a man, but they were warm, and that was what mattered. By early afternoon, the weather had cleared enough to travel. The world outside the cabin was transformed, buried under nearly 2 feet of fresh snow that glittered blindingly in the weak winter sunlight. Austin brought his horse around and helped Lorelei mount, settling her in the saddle with her injured leg carefully positioned. He swung up behind her again, one arm around her waist. "The ranch is called the Red River Ranch," he told her as they started out. "Named for a creek that runs through the property. It is not fancy, but it is comfortable enough. My foreman and his wife live in a small house on the property. They are good people and will help look after you while you heal." The ride was long and cold, but the fresh snow had stopped falling, and the sun, though weak, was a welcome sight after the storm. Austin kept up a steady stream of conversation, perhaps sensing that it helped distract Lorelei from the pain and discomfort. He told her about his ranch, how he had started with just a few head of cattle 5 years ago and built it up through hard work and careful management. He talked about the land, the challenges of ranching in the Colorado high country, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Lorelei found herself genuinely interested, asking questions and sharing her own story in return. She told him about growing up in Denver, about her father, who had died 2 years earlier and left her enough money to live independently. She told him about her sister Margaret, who had married a shopkeeper in Silver Creek and was now expecting her first child, which was why the pneumonia was so dangerous. "We will get that medicine to her," Austin said firmly. "Soon as you are settled, I will ride to Silver Creek myself. It is too dangerous for you to travel, but I can make the journey in a day if I push hard." "You would do that? But you do not even know her." "I know you," he said simply. "And you risked your life trying to help her. That tells me she is worth helping." Something warm bloomed in Lorelei's chest that had nothing to do with the arm around her waist or the heat from the horse's body. She turned her head slightly to look at Austin's face, at the strong line of his jaw, and the way his eyes scanned the landscape constantly, alert for danger. He was a good man, she realized, the kind of man her father would have respected. The Red River Ranch appeared in the late afternoon, nestled in a valley between snow-covered hills. It was larger than Lorelei had expected, with a solid two-story house, a big barn, several outbuildings and corrals that held what looked like at least 50 head of cattle. Smoke rose from two chimneys, and as they approached, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. "Boss, you made it back," the man called. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. "We were getting worried with that storm." "Had some complications, John," Austin replied, reining in his horse. "This is Miss Lorelei Ashford. She had an accident on the mountain pass. She needs a place to recover for a few days." John's eyes widened with understanding, and he immediately moved to help. "Martha," he called toward the smaller house. "Martha, come quick. We have got an injured lady here." A plump woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair emerged from the small house, wiping her hands on her apron. Within minutes, Lorelei found herself carried into Austin's house and settled into a comfortable room on the ground floor that Austin said was usually a guest room. Martha fussed over her like a mother hen, bringing hot water and clean bandages, and producing a nightgown that she said belonged to her daughter, who lived back east. "You poor dear," Martha said as she helped Lorelei change and examined her ankle. "That is a nasty sprain. You are lucky Mr. Kincaid found you when he did. Another few hours in that cold, and you might have lost toes, or worse." "I know. I owe him my life." Martha smiled warmly. "He is a good man, our Mr. Kincaid. Took us on when most ranchers would not hire a couple our age. Pays fair and treats us right. You are in good hands here." Over the next few days, Lorelei settled into an unexpected routine. Austin insisted she stay in bed and rest her ankle, and Martha made sure she followed orders, bringing meals and checking on her regularly. Austin himself was often busy with ranch work, but he stopped by several times each day to see how she was healing and to keep her company. On the third day, true to his word, Austin prepared to ride to Silver Creek with the medicine. Lorelei tried to write a letter to her sister explaining everything that had happened, but her hands shook as she thought about Margaret lying sick and helpless. Austin noticed her distress and crouched beside her chair, where she was now allowed to sit with her ankle elevated. "I will get there in time," he said quietly. "And I will make sure she knows you nearly killed yourself trying to reach her. That ought to cheer her up some." "Tell her I will come as soon as I can walk," Lorelei said, handing him the letter. "And tell her husband Daniel that he needs to take good care of her or answer to me." Austin's lips quirked in a smile. "I will deliver the message exactly as stated." He left before dawn, and the house felt strangely empty without his presence. Lorelei found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the wooden floors, missing their conversations, and the way he had of making her feel safe. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, that any woman would feel attached to the man who saved her life, but she knew it was more than that. Martha seemed to sense her mood. "He will be back tomorrow night or the day after at the latest," she said as she brought lunch. "Mr. Kincaid is not one to linger in town when there is work to be done here." "I was not worried," Lorelei lied. Martha gave her a knowing look but said nothing, just patted her hand and left her to her thoughts. Austin returned late the following night, and Lorelei heard him arrive, even though she had been trying to sleep. She heard his boots in the hallway, then a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she called, hastily smoothing her borrowed nightgown. He entered, still wearing his trail clothes and covered in road dust. "I did not mean to wake you, but I thought you would want to know. Your sister is doing much better. The doctor said the medicine came just in time. She should make a full recovery." Relief flooded through Lorelei so powerfully that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Did you see her? Was she able to talk?" "I did. She was weak but awake and very worried about you. I told her you were safe and healing well." He pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket. "She sent this for you." Lorelei took the letter with trembling hands. "You must be exhausted. Thank you for writing so fast." "It was nothing. Get some rest. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I am glad I could help, Lorelei. Your sister is lucky to have you. After he left, Lorelei read the letter by candlelight. Margaret's handwriting was shaky but unmistakably hers, full of love and gratitude, and scolding Lorelei for taking such risks. She described how Austin had arrived like an angel of mercy, refusing any payment and staying only long enough to make sure Daniel understood the doctor's instructions for Margaret's care. She also added, with her usual perception, that Mr. Kincaid seemed like a very fine gentleman and that Lorelei should take her time recovering before rushing back to Denver. Over the next week, Lorelei's ankle healed steadily. She graduated from bed to a chair, then to hobbling around with a cane that John carved for her from a piece of oak. As her mobility improved, she found herself spending more time with Austin, sharing meals and conversation. He showed her around the ranch as much as her healing ankle would allow, introducing her to his horses and explaining his plans for expanding the cattle operation in the spring. Lorelei discovered that she genuinely enjoyed his company. Austin was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He listened when she talked, really listened, and treated her opinions with respect. He was also remarkably well read for a rancher, and they spent many evenings discussing books and current events while sitting by his fireplace. I was supposed to go to university, Austin told her one evening, had plans to study engineering. But my father died and left debts, and I had to sell everything to pay them off. Ranching was what I knew, so I came out here to start over. Do you regret it? Lorelei asked. Not going to university? He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Sometimes, but I have built something here that is mine, that no one can take away, that matters more than I thought it would. I understand that, Lorelei said. After my father died, everyone expected me to find a husband immediately, someone to take care of me. But I wanted to prove I could take care of myself. That is why I never married. Austin looked at her, his blue-gray eyes intent. Is that the only reason? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Lorelei felt her heart begin to race. I never met anyone who made me want to reconsider, she said carefully. Until recently. The firelight played across Austin's face, highlighting the strong planes and angles. Lorelei, he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. I know we have not known each other long, and I know you have a life waiting for you in Denver, but I need you to know that these past 2 weeks have been the best I have had in years. Having you here, talking with you, getting to know you, it has made me realize how lonely I have been. I have been lonely too, Lorelei admitted softly. I just didn't realize it until now. Austin rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her so they were at eye level. I do not want you to leave, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know that is selfish of me. I know you have obligations and a life elsewhere, but I have to say it. These weeks with you have shown me what my life could be, what I want it to be. Lorelei reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough texture of his beard under her fingers. I do not want to leave either, she whispered. I thought I was happy in Denver, but that was before I knew what this could feel like. What does it feel like? Austin asked, covering her hand with his own. Like coming home, she said. Like finding something I did not even know I was looking for. Austin leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. His arms came around her carefully, mindful of her healing ankle, and she melted into his embrace. The kiss was everything she had dreamed about during the long winter nights, full of promise and passion, and the bone-deep rightness of two people finding each other against all odds. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Austin rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me, he murmured. Not just for now. Stay and build a life with me here. Marry me, Lorelei. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Lorelei wrote to her friends in Denver, arranging for her belongings to be sent to the ranch. She visited Margaret in Silver Creek, who had fully recovered and was delighted by the news of Lorelei's engagement. Margaret and Daniel made the trip down to the ranch for the wedding in early April, along with a few other friends and neighbors. They were married in the ranch house parlor by a circuit preacher, with Martha crying happy tears and John beaming with pride. Lorelei wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her sew, and Austin wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when he looked at her and said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, full of the quiet strength that had first attracted her to him. The wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Austin was patient and gentle, and Lorelei felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, now their bed, and talked until dawn about their dreams and plans for the future. Life on the ranch was hard work, but Lorelei threw herself into it with enthusiasm. She learned to cook ranch meals for the hands during branding season, to keep the household accounts, to help with the horses. Austin taught her to rope cattle and mend fences, treating her as a full partner in the operation. She discovered she had a talent for training horses, and soon the ranch was known for producing well-mannered mounts that fetched good prices. Their first winter together brought challenges. The snow came early and heavy, and they lost some cattle to the cold, but they weathered it together, sitting by the fire on long evenings, Austin reading aloud while Lorelei worked on mending or knitting. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing stories from their pasts or making plans for the spring. And sometimes they would not talk at all, just be together in comfortable silence, which Lorelei found she treasured as much as conversation. In the spring, Lorelei discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. Her mother had died giving birth to her youngest sibling when Lorelei was 12, and the memory had haunted her ever since. Austin sensed her fear without her having to say anything. "We will get through this together," he promised, holding her close. "And we will get the best doctor in the territory if we have to. I will not lose you, Lorelei. I cannot." "I am frightened," she admitted. "But I want this baby so much. I want to give you a family." "You already have," he said, kissing her forehead. "You are my family. Everything else is just a blessing on top of that." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Lorelei found the summer heat oppressive, and her swelling belly made ranch work increasingly difficult. Martha took over most of the heavy tasks, and Austin hovered like a worried mother hen, driving Lorelei to distraction with his constant concern. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she finally snapped at him in August when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years." "Not my woman," he said stubbornly. "Not my wife carrying my child. Let Martha do the laundry." They argued about it, their first real fight, but it ended with both of them laughing at the absurdity of fighting over laundry. That night, lying in bed with Austin's hand resting protectively on her belly, Lorelei felt the baby kick for the first time. Austin's face lit up with wonder, and he spent the next hour talking to her stomach, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together. Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1883, arriving 3 weeks early and nearly giving Austin a heart attack in the process. The doctor barely made it in time, and the labor was long and difficult. But when it was over, and the baby's cry filled the room, healthy and strong, Lorelei saw tears streaming down Austin's face. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming bundle in her arms. "A fine, healthy boy." They named him Thomas after Austin's late brother, with the middle name James after Lorelei's father. He was small but perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same blue-gray as his father's. Austin was instantly besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. "I never knew I could love something this much," he confessed to Lorelei one night as he held Thomas against his chest. It terrifies me how much I love him, how much I love you both. I know, Lorelei said, understanding perfectly. But we will keep each other safe. That is what family does. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, and they were able to expand their holdings and build a new, larger barn. Thomas grew into an energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, chattering constantly and getting into everything. When he was 2, Lorelei became pregnant again, and this time she was less afraid, more confident in her body's ability to bring a child into the world. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1886, an easy birth compared to Thomas's dramatic entrance. They named her Caroline Margaret, after no one in particular, but just because they liked the name. She was beautiful and placid, with Lorelei's dark hair and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Thomas was initially suspicious of the tiny creature who had invaded his territory, but he quickly became fiercely protective of his little sister. Lorelei would often find him sitting beside her cradle, telling her stories or showing her his treasured possessions. Austin would watch them with an expression of such contentment that it made Lorelei's heart ache with happiness. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Margaret and Daniel had 3 children of their own, and the families visited back and forth regularly. John and Martha remained with them, growing older but no less vital, helping to raise the children and manage the property. The Red River Ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the best operations around, and Austin's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread far and wide. But for all their success, what Lorelei treasured most were the quiet moments. Sitting on the porch in the evenings with Austin, watching their children play in the yard, riding out to check the herds together on crisp autumn mornings, lying in bed on lazy Sunday mornings, wrapped in each other's arms while the children slept late. These were the moments that made up a life, the small, precious times that she knew she would remember when she was old. One winter evening, nearly 10 years after Austin had climbed down into that ravine to save her, Lorelei stood at the window watching snow fall gently outside. Behind her, she could hear Austin helping Thomas with his arithmetic homework while Caroline practiced her letters at the kitchen table. The house was warm and full of life and love, and she felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost brought her to her knees. Austin must have sensed something because he appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About the day I fell into the ravine," she said. "About how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die alone in the cold. I could not have imagined then that it would lead to this. To you, to them, to this life we have built." "I think about that day too," Austin admitted. "About how close I came to riding past, to missing you entirely. My whole life would have been different, empty compared to what I have now." "Do you think we were meant to find each other?" Lorelei asked. "That it was fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it?" Austin considered the question seriously, as he always did with her queries. "I do not know about fate," he said finally, "but I know that when I looked down into that ravine and saw you there, something in me recognized you. Even though we had never met, even though I did not know your name, I knew you were important, that you were going to change my life." "You saved my life," Lorelei said, turning to face him. "In every way that matters. I was existing before, not really living. You taught me what it means to truly be alive, to be loved, to be part of something bigger than myself." Austin cupped her face in his hands, his touch still making her heart race after all these years. "We saved each other," he said. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from loneliness, from giving up on the possibility of happiness." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and behind them, they heard Caroline make gagging sounds while Thomas laughed. They broke apart, grinning at each other like conspirators. "You two are disgusting," Thomas announced, with all the authority of his 9 years. No one wants to see old people kissing. Old? Austin said in mock outrage. I will show you old, you little scamp. He chased Thomas around the table, both of them laughing, while Caroline clapped her hands in delight. Lorelei watched her family with a heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what mattered, she thought. This love, this joy, this simple domestic happiness that she had once thought was beyond her reach. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Lorelei and Austin sat together by the fire as they did most evenings. Austin was reading a newspaper that was several weeks old, the news from Denver and the wider world always taking time to reach their remote valley. Lorelei was working on a quilt, something she had taken up recently and found surprisingly soothing. Margaret wrote that she and Daniel are thinking of moving closer, Lorelei said, breaking the comfortable silence. The children are getting older and they want them to have cousins nearby. That would be good, Austin said, looking up from his newspaper. The kids would love having more children around, and you would like having your sister closer. I would, Lorelei agreed. Though I never thought I would be happy living so far from a city. I always imagined myself as a city person needing culture and society and all that. Are you unhappy here? Austin asked, a note of concern in his voice. No, Lorelei said quickly. That is what I mean. I never would have guessed that my happiness would be found on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a cowboy who rescued me from a ravine. Life is strange that way. A cowboy, Austin said, raising an eyebrow. I prefer rancher. It sounds more respectable. Lorelei laughed. You will always be the cowboy who saved me, no matter how successful you become. That is how I will always see you. And you will always be the stubborn woman who nearly got herself killed trying to help her sister, Austin countered. The woman brave enough to ride alone through a blizzard, independent enough to not need anyone but gracious enough to let me help anyway. We make quite a pair, Lorelei said. The best pair, Austin agreed. As the years continued to pass, their family grew and changed. Thomas developed a passion for horses like his mother and showed remarkable skill in training them. By the time he was 15, he was handling the most difficult animals with ease and confidence. Caroline, meanwhile, proved to have her father's head for business and would sit with Austin for hours going over accounts and discussing expansion plans. In 1895, when Thomas was 12 and Caroline was 9, Lorelei found herself unexpectedly pregnant again. At 35, she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, and the surprise pregnancy both delighted and worried her. But this time, with 2 successful births behind her and Austin by her side, she approached it with calm confidence. Their second son arrived that winter, a small but healthy baby they named William. Thomas and Caroline adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. Austin joked that they had better stop now or they would end up with a dozen children, but Lorelei could see the joy in his eyes every time he looked at their growing family. The ranch continued to prosper into the new century. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, economic downturns and changing markets. Through it all, Austin and Lorelei stood together, making decisions as partners and supporting each other through challenges. Their marriage had deepened over the years, growing from the intense passion of new love into something more profound and lasting. Margaret and Daniel did eventually move closer, buying property about 10 miles away. The two families became inseparable, their children growing up more like siblings than cousins. Holiday celebrations were loud, chaotic affairs with children running everywhere and adults trying to maintain some semblance of order. These gatherings were Lorelei's favorite times, seeing all the people she loved together and happy. John and Martha grew older but remained on the ranch until they could no longer work. When John's arthritis became too severe for ranch work, Austin set them up in a small house in the nearest town and made sure they had everything they needed. They visited regularly, and John never tired of telling stories about the early days of the ranch to anyone who would listen. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, but with his mother's quick mind and compassionate heart. When he was 20, he married a school teacher from Silver Creek, a sweet-natured woman named Emma who fit perfectly into their family. They built a house on the ranch property and began raising their own family, ensuring that the Red River Ranch would continue into the next generation. Caroline chose a different path. She attended college in Denver, studying business and economics, then returned to help manage the ranch's financial operations. She brought modern ideas and practices that helped the ranch continue to thrive in the changing times. She eventually married a lawyer from Denver, and though they lived in the city, they visited frequently and were always a part of the family. William, the surprise baby, grew up adored by everyone. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's love of learning, and he eventually became a veterinarian, using his skills to help not just the family ranch, but ranchers throughout the territory. As Lorelei and Austin grew older, they found themselves with the luxury of time. The ranch was in capable hands, their children were settled and happy, and they could finally slow down and enjoy the fruits of their labor. They took to spending afternoons on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains and reminiscing about their life together. "Do you remember the night we met?" Austin asked one evening. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined with age. But when he looked at her, Lorelei could still see the young man who had climbed down into that ravine to save her. "Every detail," Lorelei said. "The cold, the fear, and then your face appearing over the edge of the ravine like an answer to prayer." "I was terrified I would not be able to get you out," Austin admitted. "The rope kept slipping, and you were so cold. I thought I might be too late, that I might have to watch you die despite finding you. But you did not give up," Lorelei said, taking his hand. "You saved me, and in doing so you gave me this beautiful life. Everything I have, everything I am, started that night." "We gave each other a life," Austin corrected gently. "I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You brought color and joy and meaning to everything. You made me want to build something lasting, something worth passing down." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. Around them, the ranch hummed with activity. They could hear Thomas and Emma's children playing near the barn, could see the lights coming on in the houses scattered across the property. 3 generations of family, all thriving on the land they had built together. "I would do it all again," Lorelei said softly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would fall into that ravine 1,000 times if it meant finding you, and I would climb down 1,000 times to save you," Austin replied. "Every single time." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life of love and meaning. The wind carried the scent of pine and cattle, the sounds of family and home. Lorelei leaned her head on Austin's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their decades together. "Tell me again," she said, as she had countless times over the years. "Tell me about the day you found me." And Austin, who never tired of the story, began to speak. His voice was deeper now, roughened by age, but still strong and sure. He told her about tracking her horse, about the moment of decision when he could have kept riding. He told her about looking down into the ravine and seeing her huddled under the overhang, about the determination that filled him as he secured the rope and began his descent. "I knew," he said, as he always did when he reached this part of the story. "Even then, before I knew your name or anything about you, I knew you were going to be important to me. Call it fate or instinct or divine intervention, but I knew." "I knew too," Lorelei said. "When you wrapped your coat around me and lifted me like I weighed nothing, when you climbed that rope with me in your arms, refusing to let go no matter how hard it was. I knew I had found someone extraordinary." The stars multiplied overhead, the Milky Way spreading across the sky in a brilliant band of light, unpolluted by city glow. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the barn, one of the horses whinnied in response. These were the sounds of their life, as familiar and beloved as each other's voices. "We should go inside," Austin said eventually. "It is getting cold." "Just a few more minutes," Lorelei replied. "I want to remember this moment right here with you." "We have had thousands of moments," Austin said gently, "and we will have thousands more." "I know, but this one is special somehow. Can you feel it?" Austin was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I can. It feels like completion, like a story coming full circle." They did go inside eventually, helping each other up from their chairs with the careful movements of age. But before they went in, they stood together under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful and lasting. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Emma had left dinner warming on the stove, and they ate together in the kitchen where they had shared thousands of meals. After dinner, they sat by the fire, Austin reading aloud from a book while Lorelei worked on her quilting. It was the same routine they had followed for decades, comfortable and familiar and perfect in its simplicity. When they finally climbed the stairs to their bedroom, they moved slowly but with purpose. Austin helped Lorelei with the buttons on her dress, as he had done every night for nearly 40 years. She helped him with his boots, as she had done just as often. They climbed into bed together, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. "I love you," Austin said, as he did every night. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Lorelei replied, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. Today, tomorrow, and always. They drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had defied odds and overcome obstacles to find lasting love. Outside, the Colorado night was cold and clear, the ranch settling into its nighttime rhythms. And somewhere in the darkness, the ravine where their story began lay silent under the stars, a testament to how one moment of courage and compassion could change everything. The years continued to unfold, bringing new joys and sorrows, as is the way of life. They lost friends and gained grandchildren, celebrated victories and mourned defeats. Through it all, Austin and Lorelei remained constants for each other, their love the foundation upon which everything else was built. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration that drew friends and neighbors from across the county. The house was filled with laughter and music, with stories and memories shared by all who attended. When someone asked Austin to give a speech, he stood with Lorelei at his side and spoke from the heart. "I am not a man given to fancy words," he began, "but I want you all to know that everything good in my life can be traced back to one night 50 years ago when I found a woman in need at the bottom of a ravine. I climbed down with a rope to save her, never knowing that she would be the one to save me. She gave me purpose and family and love beyond measure. She made me better than I ever could have been alone." So here is to Lorelei, the bravest, most stubborn, most wonderful woman I have ever known. Thank you for falling into that ravine. Thank you for letting me climb down to save you. And thank you for every single day since. There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished, least of all Lorelei's. She stood and embraced him, and their family surrounded them, 3 generations bound by love and blood, and the legacy of 2 people who had found each other against all odds. As Lorelei and Austin entered their 70s, they slowed down considerably, but remained active in ranch life. Austin still rode out to check the herds most mornings, though now Thomas usually accompanied him. Lorelei still kept the household accounts and planned family gatherings, though Caroline had taken over most of the business operations. They had earned their rest, but neither could imagine a life of complete idleness. One spring morning, Austin woke to find Lorelei already up and dressed, standing at the bedroom window looking out at the mountains. He joined her, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture that had become automatic over their decades together. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, About how lucky we have been, she said softly. We have had 52 years together, Austin. 52 years of love and family and building this life. Not everyone gets that. Most people do not get even half of what we have had. We have been blessed, Austin agreed. More than I ever thought possible. If I died tomorrow, Lorelei said, and Austin started to protest, but she put a finger to his lips. If I died tomorrow, I would die completely happy, completely fulfilled. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I never knew I needed. You are not dying tomorrow, Austin said firmly. We have more years ahead of us, many more. I hope so, Lorelei said. But if not, I want you to know that I have no regrets. None at all. Falling into that ravine was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it led me to you. They stood together watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks, gold and pink. The ranch was waking up around them, smoke beginning to rise from chimneys, the sounds of cattle and horses drifting up from the barns. It was a sight they had seen thousands of times, but it never lost its power to move them. In the end, Lorelei and Austin were granted many more years together. They lived to see great-grandchildren born, and the ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's capable management. They grew old together with grace and dignity, their love deepening with each passing year until it was impossible to imagine one without the other. When Austin finally passed away at the age of 82, it was peacefully in his sleep with Lorelei holding his hand. She grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together, and in the memories of a life well lived and thoroughly loved. Lorelei lived another 5 years after Austin's death, remaining on the ranch she had helped build, surrounded by family. She spent her final years telling stories to her great-grandchildren, passing down the history of how their family began. Her favorite story, the one she told most often, was about a young woman who fell into a ravine during a snowstorm and the brave cowboy who climbed down with a rope to save her. And that, she would tell the wide-eyed children, is how your great-grandfather and I met. It was the scariest moment of my life and the beginning of my greatest adventure. Remember, children, that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. You just have to be brave enough to hold on and see where they take you. When Lorelei finally passed away at the age of 84, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were reported to be a whispered, "I am coming, Austin." They buried her next to him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree that they had planted together in their first year of marriage. The headstone was simple but perfect. Austin and Lorelei Kincaid, two souls who found each other in a storm and built a life in the sunshine. The Red River Ranch continues to this day, passed down through the generations, each adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation laid by Austin and Lorelei. The ravine where they met has become something of a family landmark, a place of pilgrimage for their descendants who go there to remember the unlikely beginning of their family's story. And sometimes on quiet winter nights, when the snow falls softly and the wind whispers through the Colorado mountains, people say you can almost see them. A young cowboy climbing down into a ravine with a rope and a young woman waiting below, their love story just beginning, eternal and unchanging as the mountains themselves.